So, as another day goes by, so too is it another day where we sit back and watch the games industry showing no signs of slowing up on monetization and loot boxes. Like many of you out there, I was sat there thinking to myself, the final ray of hope that we as gamers have is actually the Belgian government. Of course, last October we learned that EA would be under criminal investigation as a result of its refusal to tune loot boxes in accordance with the new Belgian laws. Of course, this is no fresh news, but myself, I was sat there thinking, it's now nearly halfway through December, and it's been quite some time, and frankly, we haven't heard a peep on the matter since that news originally broke out back in October. So I thought to myself, you know what, I'm going to go nuts. I'm just going to go ahead and email Belgian government and see what happens, and ask them for some kind of an update. And as luck would have it, they actually replied to me. I got some further emails of exactly the right kinds of people that I needed to be speaking to. It was very kind of them to provide those emails. So I sent my worries over to the Belgian Gambling Commission, and I said, hey guys, what's going on? We haven't heard anything. Is there anything you can tell the public? Now, a lot of us could be forgiven for being cynical. A lot of us could be forgiven for thinking that maybe, just maybe, Belgian government eventually caved, just like all of the other governments investigating EA. Maybe they just swept the problem under the rug and quietly walked away from it. Well, after receiving an email from Peter Naessens, I'm happy to report that is not the case. Belgian government is indeed still fighting the war against loot boxes as enthusiastically as they were originally when we first read about them in the news. Before I get into the specifics here, I do want to make a clear distinction. Belgium's case is not necessarily against EA specifically, it's against loot boxes as a practice, wherever they may be found. Their case is also built to fight against such practices in the AAA space only, meaning indie and free-to-play titles are clear of Belgian scrutiny. It's also important to remember this is not a battle against microtransactions. Belgium's goal is to remove the dishonest, random chance nature of loot boxes, but clearly signposted transactions within video games will also remain clear of Belgian scrutiny. So, as I said, Peter Naessens got back to me. This is the man who works for the Belgian Gambling Commission, and he tells me that the fight against loot box culture is indeed still going strong. He says, as the matter is now under criminal investigation by the Brussels Public Prosecution Office, it's up to the Brussels Public Prosecutor to decide what precise action they're going to make. A police report about the illegal operation of gambling in Belgium has been sent to them, obviously parties concerned, and a copy of the police report has been sent over to all other involved parties. Naessens goes on to say that the involved parties at present are EA, FIFA 18 and FIFA 19 to be specific, and Sony. Now the last one, Sony, there came as a bit of a surprise to me, but I guess as a company party to the sale of these games, it makes sense that Sony is at least informed of EA having now found itself in hot water. Naessens goes on to make it clear and simple that Belgium has not lost traction in its fight against loot boxes. He said, our conclusions are not changed, and we continue to believe that paid loot boxes are a danger for minors, vulnerable people in particular, and cannot be offered in Belgium without the necessary gambling regulation. Now, obviously, my natural response to him and what he has said here was, has there been any justice served? Have there been any changes as a result of your laws against loot boxes? Well, in their big drive to compile an accurate report to build their case against loot boxes, the Belgian Gambling Commission officially investigated Overwatch, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, FIFA 18 and Star Wars Battlefront 2. Of those 4 games, 2 have bent to Belgium's will and changed the way that loot boxes are presented in their games, that is, if you happen to be playing them as a citizen of Belgium. If, as a citizen of Belgium, you sit down and play FIFA 18 or FIFA 19, however, changes are not present there. You can still get loot boxes in those games in that country, which is, of course, where the criminal investigation against EA begins. However, in the case of Counter-Strike and Overwatch, changes have been made. Belgian citizens will now be navigating those menu screens of those games, and they won't see a single loot box. Valve and Blizzard, respectively, have acquiesced to Belgium's ruling and removed those features entirely from their games when you play them in Belgium, and it only makes EA's ongoing defiance all the more apparent. Nason sent me an official PDF copy of their final compiled report against loot boxes. It is publicly available, and I'll stick a link in the description below if you are interested in having a look at it yourself. But where things get particularly interesting in this report is where it discusses PEGI. You know, PEGI 18. Those guys. Of course, this organisation is the one that determines age ratings for video games, and after also launching an investigation into PEGI and its policies and how it operates, Belgium found a damning inconsistency in their rating system. When looking at the 4 games investigated, it was noticed that the age ratings never really correlated with the presence of gambling mechanics in any one game, contrary to what any country's legal gambling age is. In the case of Belgium, it's 21 and up. The report goes on to state they do not systematically check whether the games allow betting, winning or losing. Of course, the first step towards fixing all of this from PEGI's perspective is acknowledging that loot boxes are indeed gambling. Of course, they have flatly refused to make this acknowledgement, so on Belgium's part, it's pretty much a realization that PEGI is not likely to engage in scrutinization alongside Belgium of loot boxes, despite how it's the most likely organisation best suited to the job. According to the report, PEGI sees loot box systems as only, inverted commas, simulated gambling, and therefore it doesn't count. Perhaps top officials at PEGI should take a look at how this simulation is actually affecting real-world people, as gambling addiction is demonstrably shooting up in young people here in the UK. Again, I'll pop a link with the facts on that in the description below. Most importantly, as is the case for many other countries, the age rating of a game like Overwatch clashes with the gambling age of the country it's being sold in. Authorities must first take the leap to acknowledge that loot boxes are indeed gambling if this practice is to be curbed anywhere other than Belgium. But what about EA, I hear you ask? I hear you loud and clear, and believe me, it was a top priority for me to try and get an answer out of Peter Nasons on this front. Nasons had been kind enough to give me the time of day as much as he did in the first place, so he can be given a little bit of slack when he actually said, we have been advised not to make any further individual statements about FIFA 18 and FIFA 19 in order to avoid any damaging of the legal procedure from our side, which of course was a little bit disappointing, but it is entirely fair. Having worked in the legal sector myself for several years now, I can tell you that cases like this can take years to muddle through to a conclusion, especially when it's a case of this scope and when corporations as big as EA are involved. So it's very important for the Belgian government to maintain a degree of confidentiality in order to keep their case solid and free and outside of bias. I'm sorry I couldn't bring you any juicy nuggets on this part, guys, but if anything, the main takeaway from Nason's comments is that EA is absolutely not off the hook. It's important to remember that these legal cases can take a long old time, maybe even as long as 5 years, but hopefully someday in the near future we will get an answer, and when that answer comes through, it's going to shape the entire landscape of the video games industry, as EA will serve as a hot take example of just what happens to game publishers when they push their luck this far. After I had this little light bulb thought process and went looking for answers, I really wanted to find out the information because, like me, for those who are genuinely interested and care and who are concerned for the state of gaming today, the lack of update on this was like a deafening silence. Like many who have watched this video, we'll wait impatiently for further developments of all the news in the gaming journalistic sphere. This is of a top priority. Best not to forget that even as updates fade away into the background. I think the biggest deal here is that if Belgium is successful in the long run in their battle against EA, it's going to stand as a powerful example to other governments that action can and absolutely should be made against these predatory practices and against these money-hungry companies that most of us don't want, but some of us fall victim to. Belgium has already made progress with Steam and Blizzard, two massive companies that, unlike EA, have had the humility to respect a government's law and make real changes for Belgian gamers. Sadly, For the rest of us, we must endure this unfiltered greed bending our games for the worse. Dependent on Belgium's success, we can only look to the future and keep a keen eye on the changes that it may bring. And that about wraps up today's news sesh. I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. If you're still here, thank you so much for sticking with me. Go right ahead and click that subscribe button down there to keep updated on any other videos that I make. It would also be really cool if you followed me on Facebook, always popping up funny little memes and other gaming news, because Lord knows I can't cover it all on my own. Either way, I hope to see you soon for the next sesh. Take care.